Lambeau Field, 6 in the morning. The groundskeeper's hands were shaking when he picked up the phone. Not from the cold, from what he had to say. "Mr. Lombardi," he began, "the heating system failed overnight. The field is frozen solid. Concrete, it's unplayable." There was silence on the other end. Long silence. Then Lombardi spoke. 2 words. "Play anyway." The line went dead. The groundskeeper stood there holding the receiver, staring at a field that looked like the surface of the moon in December. 37,000 fans were coming. The New York Giants were coming. And Vince Lombardi had just decided that none of it mattered. Not the frozen ground. Not the danger. Not the logic. Because Vince Lombardi hadn't spent 15 years being told he wasn't good enough to lead a team, just to cancel a championship game because the weather was inconvenient. Now, to understand what happened on that field, you need to understand what brought him there. Lombardi was born June 11, 1913, in Brooklyn, New York, son of an Italian immigrant butcher who ran his shop with the precision of a man who understood that every cut mattered. That waste was sin. That excellence was not optional. He raised his oldest son the same way. Vince grew up where mediocrity was not tolerated, where excuses were not accepted. He got a football scholarship to Fordham University and became one of the legendary 7 blocks of granite. An offensive line opponents simply could not move. Not the biggest, not the fastest, but the most prepared, always. That never changed. After Fordham, he coached high school football in New Jersey for 8 years. 8 years. The man who would become the greatest coach in NFL history, spending nearly a decade coaching teenagers because nobody in professional football would give him a chance. He applied for college head coaching positions. Rejected. Professional assistant positions. Rejected. Too intense. Too demanding. Too difficult. Lombardi heard all of it and kept working. Because what else do you do when the door won't open? You make yourself impossible to ignore. His break came in 1954, when the New York Giants hired him as offensive coordinator. Finally, 40 years old, he made the Giants' offense one of the most feared in the league. Worked alongside Tom Landry, 2 of the greatest football minds in history on the same staff. He waited for the head coaching offer that had to come. It came in 1959. From the worst possible place, Green Bay, Wisconsin. The Packers had won 1 game the previous season. 1. They were a laughingstock. Serious coaches turned the job down before Lombardi's name came up. Lombardi didn't turn it down. He saw a blank canvas, a place to build exactly what he wanted. His first team meeting in Green Bay is the stuff of legend. Players came in loose, casual, accustomed to losing in the comfortable way that losing teams develop when losing becomes the expectation. Lombardi walked in, stood at the front of the room, let the silence build until it was uncomfortable. Then he said this, "Gentlemen, I have never been associated with a losing team, and I do not intend to start now." He went on to outline exactly what he expected, exactly what would be tolerated, exactly what would not. Some players thought he was performing. Thought this was the new coach routine that would soften after the first week. It did not soften. It never softened. Because Lombardi wasn't performing. He was simply telling the truth. He had never been associated with a losing team. And he meant to keep it that way. 1959. The Packers won 7 games. From 1 win to 7. In 1 season. 1960. They went to the NFL championship game and lost to the Eagles by 3 points. A loss that stayed with Lombardi like a stone in his chest. He replayed every decision of that game for months. Every call, every substitution, every moment where something different might have changed the outcome. He was not a man who accepted defeat philosophically. He accepted it the way you accept a debt, with the full intention of repaying it. 1961. The Packers won the NFL championship, Lombardi's first title. He stood on the field afterward and felt something he'd been waiting 48 years to feel, and immediately began thinking about 1962. If you've ever worked for something so long that winning felt more like relief than joy, you already understand Vince Lombardi. Subscribe right now. Because what happened in 1962 is the part of this story nobody tells completely. The 1962 Green Bay Packers were not just a good team, they were a machine. 13 wins, 1 loss. The most dominant single-season performance the NFL had seen in years. Quarterback Bart Starr, executing Lombardi's offense with surgical precision. Running back Jim Taylor hitting defensive lines like a freight train with a grudge. An offensive line that communicated without speaking. That moved as one organism. That Lombardi had built rep by rep, practice by practice, correction by correction over 4 years of relentless work. The NFL championship game would be at Yankee Stadium in New York, against the Giants. Lombardi's old team. The team that had given him his first professional opportunity. The game had layers that went beyond football. It always does when the past and present collide on the same field. But first, the weather. New York in late December 1962 delivered conditions that seemed almost deliberately hostile. Wind off the Hudson, temperatures in the teens, and mud, a field that had been wet and thawed and frozen again until it was less a playing surface and more a geological trap. Cleats found no purchase, footing was treacherous. Every step required a calculation. Players from both teams stood in warm-ups and looked at the field and understood that this game would not be won with precision passing or elegant route running. This game would be won by the team that could function in conditions where functioning was almost impossible. Lombardi looked at the field and said nothing. His face showed nothing, because what he saw was not a problem. What he saw was an advantage. His team had been running behind Jim Taylor all season. Physical, direct, violent football. This field rewarded exactly that. Pass routes became impossible. Receiver footwork became impossible. What became possible? Running straight ahead behind the most powerful offensive line in football and daring the defense to stop you. Lombardi had not planned the weather, but he recognized what it meant the moment he saw it. The game itself was not beautiful. Championship games in those conditions rarely are. It was a grinding contest that looked less like professional athletics and more like two groups of men fighting over territory in the most literal sense. The Giants' defense was extraordinary. Sam Huff, Andy Robustelli, Dick Modzelewski, men who had spent careers learning to stop exactly what Lombardi was trying to do. They stopped it, repeatedly. The score stayed close. The field got worse as the game went on. Footsteps from the first quarter left permanent impressions that became obstacles by the fourth. The wind picked up. Both teams made mistakes that the conditions made inevitable. And Lombardi stood on the sideline in his long camel coat and watched and adjusted and waited. Because Lombardi's teams were built for exactly this. Built for the moment when everything became difficult and execution became almost impossible. That's when the preparation showed. That's when the thousands of practice reps in cold Wisconsin mornings paid the dividends Lombardi had always known they would. Jim Taylor that day was something beyond a football player. He was a force of will in cleats. He ran into the Giants' defense over and over with the specific violence of a man who has decided that pain is simply not relevant information. He was hit. He got up. He was hit again. He got up again. He did not celebrate, did not gesture, did not show the Giants' defense anything except the sight of him returning to the huddle for another play. By the third quarter, the Giants' defenders were beginning to hit Taylor, not just to stop him, but to see if he would stay down. He never stayed down. There is a specific psychological effect that produces in a defense. When you cannot discourage a man, when you cannot hurt him enough to make him reconsider, when he keeps getting up with the same expression every single time, something happens to the defenders that is difficult to name but impossible to ignore. They start to wonder, and wondering is the beginning of losing. Lombardi's Packers won 16-7. The final score doesn't capture what it cost both teams to get there. Players on both sides ended the game with injuries they wouldn't fully understand until the next morning when the adrenaline was gone and the cold had settled into every damaged joint and muscle. The field had claimed its price equally, but Green Bay had prepared for a field like that, had run behind that offensive line in weather like that, had been coached by a man who understood that championships are not won on perfect days in perfect conditions. They are won when the conditions are worst, when the difference between teams is not talent but preparation, not skill but will. After the game, Lombardi stood inside the locker room door for a moment, before his players saw him. Just stood there, looking at these men who had done what he asked in conditions that asked everything of them. Then he walked in and said what Lombardi always said after wins. Not excessive praise, not wild celebration. You did your jobs. Then he shook hands with every player individually. Quietly, the handshakes meant more than the words. They always did with Lombardi. Vince Lombardi coached the Packers through 1967, won 5 NFL championships, won the first 2 Super Bowls. The trophy awarded to every Super Bowl champion is called the Lombardi Trophy. Not because he lobbied for it, because after he was gone, the league understood no other name made as much sense. He died September 3, 1970, 57 years old. What he left behind was not just wins. It was a philosophy. The preparation that happens before anyone is watching. The work that happens when it would be easier to stop. The decision to get up one more time when staying down is an option. Every frozen field was a question, and Lombardi spent his life teaching men how to answer it.